Hey guys, you can get access to my Valorant competitive course. It explains all of the fundamentals that you're going to want to understand in order to master competitive, to rank up, and to basically get out of wherever you're stuck at. No matter what your rank is, you can learn something from the course. Check the Patreon link in the description, and see you guys. Hope you enjoy the video. Hey guys, today I'm going to be giving you a few tips or a few different movement mechanics to master movement in Valorant. Right, so the first tip or the first movement category we're going to be talking about is crouching. Right, so crouching is a pretty controversial movement topic because a lot of people, all the way from the pro down to lower ranks, have different takes on this, right? So crouching, in my opinion, is both a good and a bad thing. Those of you who watch my streams know that I sometimes unbind crouch. If you want to unbind crouch, you can find that here in controls. Just hit the minus button. I also play it on with toggle crouch off. Right? So the reason that I say that crouching can be both a good and a bad thing is because I think crouching is a tool, right? It's a tool that when used properly can be extremely effective at kind of outwitting your opponents, kind of outmaneuvering your opponents. But whenever it becomes a bad habit, and that's what we're going to be talking about here, is crouching whenever it's excessive and mindless, that's when it becomes bad. And so what I mean by that is basically, we all know that the people we've played against in deathmatch where they just crouch every gunfight, right? So you see them, they instantly, what they do is they crouch and start spraying. This is when crouching is bad because it's very predictable. Your headshot level is going to go down to your chest level, which makes it even easier to hit you. Also, when you crouch, it's harder. You move slower, right? So it's harder to kind of avoid getting shot. It's harder to strafe. So you want to have that ability to strafe. But with that being said, crouching can sometimes be extremely useful to outmaneuver your opponents, like I said. So when should you be crouching? Crouching is good when you occasionally use it to throw your opponent's aim off, right? So again, it's kind of hard for me to give you like specific scenarios, but you could think of it kind of like strafing. It's kind of like trying to tell someone when to strafe. But basically, if you just, if I think a good way to say is like whenever you're in a 1v1, it can be extremely effective to just kind of throw in a crouch, especially if you have not been doing that recently. Because again, if you're always crouching and taking gunfights, like always, it's just going to be predictable over time throughout a single game, and enemies are going to start, basically just outplaying you because you crouch. And so if you guys do have this habit of crouching, like most gunfights you take, all you need to do is unbind crouch and just get comfortable taking gunfights without crouching, because you do not need to crouch in order to win gunfights, even though it might feel very weird or very awkward to play without crouch. So if you guys do have that problem, again, unbind crouch and it will help you out a lot. So moving on to the next category, the next topic that's going to really help you master your movement in Valorant is understand shift walking versus running, right? This might sound super basic or super simple, but let's actually start with even more basic things, right? So basically, I remember coaching someone and they did not know that movement speed was the same for when you're shift walking with your knife versus your gun out, right? So this is something that you want to understand. Again, this is relatively basic, but if you don't know that, you can, whenever you're shift walking at any point, just keep your gun out because you're not penalized. Unless you're literally like in your spawn, right? At that point, you might as well run though. But there's no movement speed difference between shift walking with your gun or knife out, no matter what gun it is, okay? So, shift walking versus running, most scenarios, it's best to shift walk to preserve your silence, right? Because whenever you're in a game like Valorant, silence is very important. It basically means that enemies do not know where you are, and whenever enemies do not know where you are, you have the upper hand against your opponents, right? So, with that being said, there are also scenarios where you do want to be running, because I'm going to give you a scenario right here on bind, right? I noticed this a lot. So there are a lot of scenarios. Let's say that the enemy team is pushing up, they're running into A, they're shooting, they're using abilities, right? So you can use all that noise, all that commotion that they're creating as kind of like a mask for you to run up behind them, right? So I understand that sometimes you don't know if there's someone like sitting here waiting, but most of the time there's probably not going to be if they're running in fast. So with all the noise they're making running up, you can use that time to sprint for like, this much distance, and then you can shift walk, right? Because as you get closer, they're going to be able to hear you more and more, right? But from like here, you can shift walk. I mean run, you can run, and then now you start shift walking, right? That's what I do if I know that they're pushing in and I can hear them like shooting, they're running in up here, they're making a lot of noise, they're throwing in abilities, and that allows you to save like, a few seconds, and that few seconds is going to allow you to get here behind them before they all get into a better position, right? And that's going to actually grant you like 2 or 3 kills, whereas otherwise you might just get 1 or 2, right? So, this is what I'm basically telling you about shift walking versus walking is you really want to find a balance, okay? There are other cases where you want to consider running. So if the enemies already kind of know where you are, there's really no point in shift walking, right? Like let's say that I'm playing, oh no, let's go to B, so let's swap it up, right? Let's say I'm playing like elbow. Let's say I'm playing like right here actually, okay? Let's say I'm playing right here and then like I get darted here somehow. They scan me. So what's the point of trying to shift walk now? I might as well just like start run. You don't want to like full run because then obviously you're like giving yourself away. But another thing you guys can realize here is that you can actually strafe back and forth without making noise. Right now I'm not holding shift, okay? I'm not holding shift. I'm running. You see I made a step, but you can actually strafe in and out without holding shift and not make noise. So you want to practice this. You want to see how far you can step. See, I'm not holding shift, whereas here I'm holding shift. Strafing is much slower. But you can do this without making noise. This is something you really want to practice, and this falls into this category as well. This is movement, and if you can get good at doing that, it's much easier to peek people silently and quickly, because if you can do it silently and quickly, you have a strong upper hand against the enemies, especially as a duelist, or especially as someone that is wanting to get better at taking fights against your opponents. So although shift walking is useful, it can be easily overused and lead to significant waste of time. And this is probably going to be the biggest takeaway for you guys. Basically, like if you're always shift walking around like everywhere and you're overly cautious, because that's kind of what it is, right? You're overly cautious about the enemies hearing you. Understand that there's actually a radius for kind of where you can be heard, and that's what this circle is for, right? So you should really kind of start to think about this. You can actually see that enemies here cannot hear me, even if, right? So the only thing you have to worry about is really like, right, people just sitting here, and then you can even run like all the way up here and now it's start shift walking, right? So start using that whenever whenever you're trying to gauge if enemies can hear you or not. But also, right, if you're rotating, there's no point in shift walking, if the enemies are always hard hitting A, there's probably no point in shift walking like all the way down long. You might as well just run, right? So these are some specific examples, but again, the main takeaway here is find a balance, right? You guys really want to find a balance within your own gameplay and with your own rank in games. So hopefully that makes sense. Moving on to the last thing is going to be types of peeking and what each type of peeking is best for, okay? So there's a few different types of peeking, and I'm going to be talking about which ones I use most and why. So the first one is just simply wide swinging. This is naturally something you want to be good at whenever you're a duelist, but also on any agent. All of these types of peeking are things that you want to be good at on most agents, right? Even if you use some of them less on other agents than others, right? Because, as a duelist, you're probably wide swinging more. As like a sentinel, you're probably jiggling more. But wide swinging, it's basically just holding down A or D and just swinging to see if there's anyone there with the intention of fighting, right? I'm not doing this just to like get information. I'm doing it because I want to take a fight. And if I see someone, I stop and I shoot, right? There's this like movement meta that I've noticed where people just wide swing super far, like unnecessarily far to throw people off. So let's say there's someone like right here, I see them, but instead of stopping as soon as I see them, I keep going and then I kill them. That's like some kind of meta. It's not like super recent, but I've noticed that that's something people do, and it's really good, especially if you're in a low rank, to just swing out super wide and keep going even after you see them for just like a second or so, and then shoot them, because they're just gonna be like, they're not gonna hit you most likely, right? Even in higher ranks, it just confuses people. They don't expect you to do that. So that's wide swinging. You can do that everywhere. You can do that whenever you're entering sight. This is technically considered wide swinging because you're swinging like everything, but you're also entering and opening up space. Next, we have jiggle peeking. Everyone likely knows about jiggle peeking, even if you don't do it. So jiggle peeking, we can do that here, right? So jiggle peeking would be kind of like this. I like to do this again. The most important thing about jiggle peeking is pretty much the rate that you do that, or how much time is in between each jiggle. Sometimes I see people jiggling like this, right? Like a lot. But I don't jiggle that often. Also, whenever you jiggle, make sure you're not like right next to the wall. Make sure you're farther away from the wall, because it's better. If you look at the minimap, you'll see that. You'll see why, right? I'm not gonna explain that in this video, but basically, whenever I jiggle, I like to jiggle out just a little bit, and then I wait a few seconds, jiggle again, and I try not to make noise when I do it as well, right? Because you can do that without making noise, like we just recently said. And so I'll just go like this, right? And once I see someone, if I see someone, I'll either be like, oh, there's one long, and come back, or I'll just see one and then fight them, right? Or maybe I'll see them, come back, and then swing on them, or do like the wide swing, right? You can combine the two methods. So jiggle peeking is extremely useful because you can get information, fall back, and just kind of basically get information and play off of the information however you want, right? If the enemies are super aggressive, you want to get information early because they've been pushing fast B. Get information, you see them and you run back, or you can get information and then kind of peek and fight off of it. So that's the value of jiggle peeking. The next type of peeking is called slicing the pie, and this is something that I've kind of talked about before as well. And this is something that you primarily use on attack or whenever you retake on defense. And basically slicing the pie is, so say I need to clear out hookah and I'm kind of on my own. There's a lot of different places that the enemies could be, technically, okay? And so basically slicing the pie is the the act of clearing out each one of these slowly but surely, right? So you see how I'm not just like going like this, right? Or shift dogging, I'm like slowly clearing this, and then here you can think of each time that I clear one of these as kind of like slicing a pie, right? And that's why we call it that. But right, and then that just really allows you to kind of compartmentalize each part of where the enemy could be in any given part of the map, right? So whenever I'm here, right, again, try not to make noise in certain scenarios, and again, try to find a balance for that. But here, this will be an example of slicing the pie here. Instead of what a lot of people do is probably just shift walk like this, you know, not even with their crosshair placed anywhere. I'm thinking like, okay, here, maybe here, right? And so you're just really kind of sectioning off where the enemies could be, and it makes it a lot easier for you guys to kind of tackle enemies. As to like, if you're to swing out, you could face like 3 enemies simultaneously, which is much less useful, right? The last type of peeking that I have down here is jump peeking, right? So this is probably my least used type of peeking, and so I'm not actually that good at it. But basically, you kind of just like go like this, and it's really good for kind of baiting enemy shots. So I consider this type of peeking best for baiting op shots. So if you're against like an op, say there's an opper up here, here, or here, and you don't know if he's playing A or if he's playing B, right? So you can kind of go like this. I also like to do the U-jump like this. So the only downside with the U-jump that I've noticed is you can't actually see if there's anyone, whereas if you're actually good with this type of jump peek, you can see if they're there or not, and you can tell your team. So again, I'm not very bad, don't flame me, right? I'm sorry, I don't use this type of jumping very often, but if you want to get good at it, I'm sure there are methods for it. But the main reason you'd want to use this is to spot or bait out an op shot. You can use it in place of jiggle peeking, but the other downside of using jump peeking is that it makes noise every time you jump, right? So again, but that might not matter, especially if you're defending. You can just go like this and see them coming up, and right, and it's very hard for them to shoot you unless they're kind of like placing their crosshair where you're jumping. So try to be like, again, kind of sporadic with how often you use it. So again, I mostly use the first 3 methods of peeking. If you want to practice one of these specifically, go back, understand what it's good for, and then practice one of them peeking, one of the types of peeking in deathmatch, right? And find your favorite. So I would suggest maybe even combining a couple of these, you know, maybe getting good at 1 or 2 of them, because the 2 most common ones that I use are wide sweeping, jiggle peeking, and slicing the pie. So I guess 3, but it kind of depends on the scenario. It depends whether I'm attacking or defending, and yeah, it just depends. It depends on a few other factors. But you know, pick your favorite. If you really like jump peeking, absolutely go for it, right? You can also jump peek like over things like this that are a little easier. But this is going to be the movement guide. Hopefully you guys did enjoy, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.